We all have that one friend who always seeks attention using made up stories. What's the dumbest thing that he or she came up with to impress everybody, but failed dramatically? Story 1. Math teacher from high school. Dude was late 60s or early 70s, and he was a butthole and terrible at teaching. Anyway, he'd go on and give the class a 15-minute speech on dedication, hard work, perseverance, etc., and relating it to the NFL, football to you non-Americans. Class would ask what the frick he's talking about, and he'd be like, "Oh, you didn't know? I was the starting running back for the Green Bay Packers back in whatever year." Students would look online and see there's nothing on the guy and call him out on it the next day of class. Teacher's explanation was totally fake. Like the internet wouldn't have his info because the Packers moved to a different city later, so all the records got erased. Another time he was going off on how he was a Marine in the Vietnam War, and all of his stories about it didn't really add up. Some kid in the class was from a big military family and asked what platoon, brigade, rank, etc. he was in, and the teacher gave an answer that didn't even exist. He wouldn't even make up that he met a famous person, but that they were or are really good friends. He didn't just meet President Bush Sr., they were roommates in college. Not only did he hang out with some famous author a lot, but he, the teacher, was the main character in one of his books. And the teacher was a big inspiration to the author. Just a bunch of stuff like that. I think there was a story about him being in charge of some covert operations or secret spy stuff, but I missed that day of class. And no, he wasn't just teasing us and messing around, he was totally serious. Kids would call him out on his stories of grandeur, and he'd double down trying to prove his case, even though no one was buying his stories or being all that impressed by them. Story 2. I told her I could not keep hearing her go on about her boyfriend who had started using and selling drugs. Let me know when she cut ties with that crowd. Less than 2 hours later, I get a breathless call from a strange number. She is packed up and gotten out of his place, was staying in a motel. I asked how she got the money, and she mumbled something about a friend who met her and gave her money, but was out of town, and she couldn't stay at their actual place. Huh? I figured it was crap, but decided to play along and make her give herself away. I said, "Oh, my sister-in-law is nearby. I'm going to send her over with some groceries. Which motel is it?" Immediately she starts going on, No, I don't need that. Don't send anyone." But would not tell me the motel name. Said, "Oh, I don't know." I asked how you check into a motel and not know the name of it. "Go look outside, read me the sign." She just kept dodging around and saying not to worry about it. She said she would call me back the next day, and we rang off. On a hunch, I called the number back, and her roommate at the boyfriend's place picked up. She hadn't gone anywhere, just called me from a different number. The roommate put her on the phone, and she started yelling at me for calling her back. I told her when she quit lying and really got help, let me know. That was the last time I heard from Mom for a while. Story 3. Don't know that I have this friend in adulthood, but in childhood there was a classmate who consistently told fibs about the most random things. That he could hypnotize his dog. When challenged, he claimed he needed a strawberry to do it. And one theme that came up on a recurrent basis was his desire to get attention for nearly getting seriously hurt. Students were bombarded with stories of how he almost broke my insert name of appendage here while skiing or other activities. Then one day at school we were having a discussion about what careers we wanted to pursue as adults. I don't recall what other students said because things were about to go rogue quickly. This young boy said that he wanted to be a fireman. While we thought this was nice, he seemed to be focused on how it could lead to him being hurt. One girl in the class asked, "Why don't you look for a job where you don't get hurt like that?" He replied, "Well, I want to get hurt. I want to commit seppuku." Pin drop. This was in 2nd grade. I sense most of the class didn't even know what that term meant. Soon thereafter, his mother regularly showed up in the classroom to help out with grading papers and managing the students. I didn't recognize it at the time, but I'm inclined to believe this red flag of a statement prompted the teacher to notify the family, who responded by sending the mom to spend more time closer to him to help. I hope that guy's doing okay now. Story 4. I was in medical school, and I had this junior from my home state who recently got admitted to my school. Barely a week we'd known each other, and he starts flexing on me about how he's been a playa his whole life and how many chicks he's boned. with really vivid descriptions of how it all went down. Every day he had a story of how crazy he used to be when drinking with his friends back home, how much weed he used to do, etc. He also proudly described every time his engineer father escaped being arrested for embezzlement and corruption, washing that off with a story of how his family had been providing for less fortunate kids in his area. He had also had a lot of stories about how much money he spent on a whim, how many flights he missed on purpose because he was hungover, and yet again how many random chicks he had slept with. He more than often contradicted himself with his own stories, but that was okay because he apparently had mild amnesia due to a biking accident while being drunk from a lit AF party. I've since then left the school to reapply in a new cycle due to me being critically sick and missing most of my classes and exams there. I don't consider him a friend, nor an acquaintance. In fact, I wish I never met the guy. I wouldn't like to be associated with such a D-bag pile of poop, considering the career path I've chosen. Story 5. I'm from Germany, and there's this dude in our friend group that does that all the time. One time he was showing us a sketch he made and said, "This right here was never built before. It is a device that can turn off gravity." I'm the kind of guy that likes to see those guys explain themselves deeper so everyone else realizes how dumb they are. So I asked him everything about it, and it turns out he doesn't know crap about gravity. 2 weeks later, he was telling us a story about a ketamine trip he had had, and everyone was enjoying the storytelling. The problem is that he thought that no one of us was watching English YouTube videos, but he was wrong. I instantly knew that he was telling a story from a YouTuber that I watch. I was cringing a lot during that 15 minutes because he was telling it word for word. Seeing the look in his face that says, "Heck yeah, they buy it," and knowing that he's lying was just way too entertaining. He's 23, by the way. One time he was telling us all of this crazy science stuff that clearly is out of a creepypasta or something stupid like that. I freaking hate that and called him out, but he wouldn't back down. I don't know how everyone else can just let them make things up and don't be bothered by it. I really freaking can't. Story 6. I had a friend in high school try to convince everyone that he came from a filthy rich family. Eventually, after a multitude of demonstrations, I became involved in one of his elaborate ploys. He came up with a story of how he needed a ride home after school, and I didn't have a reason not to, so I obliged. He directed me towards one of the most wealthy neighborhoods in my city and had me follow another car through the gates of a private community of mansions. He told me to wait for a second after I dropped him off at one of the huge butt estates. Minutes later, he came out of the house, visually distressed, and told me to drive away and leave him at a nearby park. I don't remember the story I believed him telling me as an explanation, but I later found out that he was actually from a family on welfare, and the house that he brought me to belonged to a person he briefly met, and he was angrily kicked out after he entered their house spontaneously without mentioning anything to anyone that lived there. Afterwards, I realized that his plan was for me to drop him off and validate his huge house and wealth to everyone at school. The stories he told everyone about his wealth fell through soon afterwards. Story 7. I had an online friend who said he was secretly in the Marines and then got kicked out for being too good. He was 14 at the time. He would tell me all sorts about how he's now classed as a dangerous weapon and half the government wanted to protect him whilst the other half wanted him unalive. There were lots of fables about skills and training he had, and how he'd seen his best mate explode, etc. The funny thing is, I was friends with his cousin who went to my school, and I would always ask about his weird cousin and his lies. He was never in the Marines. He was in the cadets for a while, though, and whenever I would confront Marine Boy, he would tell me that his family can't know the truth about him, and that's why his cousin wasn't aware. I ended up talking to him years later on Facebook, and brought up how funny it was that he used to pretend to be a Marine. Unfortunately, he was apparently with his girlfriend during that conversation, and I had revealed a part of his past he definitely wanted to keep secret. I found this embarrassment to be a relief, though. I was happy to know he'd at least come to his senses. Story 8. I knew one guy who would pretty much one-up everything you said to him if you said something like, "I have a bad back and have to take medication from time to time." He'd go on about how he had surgery several times on his back and had seen many doctors and was taking very strong medication, and so on and so forth. Among the things he claims to have experienced, he said he climbed several mountains and was preparing to climb Mount Everest, won poetry and writing awards, had beaten famous sportsmen before they were famous when they were in junior leagues, had worked at Google and Apple, was to become an Olympian, but had his appendix removed shortly before he would have been picked, had dated a famous actress when they were both younger, flew hang gliders, skydived, skied, rafted, scuba dived, and sailed in several countries in the world, had beaten a grandmaster at chess. You get the idea. Funny thing is that, surprisingly, he is a really nice dude. He just talks way too much about himself and his exploits. Story 9. I remember my first year at uni. The hall I was living in was pretty good friends with the hall below us. One of the guys in the hall below us, let's call him Craig, was very socially awkward. He lived quite close to the university and went home every weekend. He liked to talk about how much he drank with his family over the weekend, and I'll try to list off what he claims he drank on a single night. 3 bottles of wine, 1 bottle of Ouzo, 2 bottles of vodka, 2 pints of lager. Mysteriously, though, when he drinks with us, he's sick after 1 pint. Oh, and one time he randomly piped up with a story about how when he was out back home, some guy kept staring at him, so he beat the crap out of him. That's the whole story, completely unprompted. Everyone just sort of said, well, that was probably an overreaction, Craig. Story 10. I no longer have this friend, but I used to. He used to claim that his dad was in Green Day. Green Day taught him how to walk and talk. He lived in Hollywood for one day of his life and met several hundred celebrities during that day. He was the fastest runner on the planet, but his mom told him to disguise his actual speed because people would make fun of him. He was in a rock band at age 9. His dad was also a video game developer and made special games for him as presents. His parents got him a bazooka for Christmas. He had a Pokemon called Mew 3. He was Hitler's great-grandson. I'll let you take a guess how many of these claims were actually true, but at least he was a kid and not a full-grown adult. Story 11. In retrospect, this is so ridiculous, but as a kid, I had a friend who swore he had a twin brother. It was pretty obvious that he didn't, since he lived in the same neighborhood as the majority of our friend group, and we all spent a lot of time out and about together on bikes, etc. Not to mention that all of our parents were friendly, and we had all of our birthday parties, barbecues, whatever, together as kids. But any time he was pressed about it, he would say that his twin brother was living with his aunt in Utah. This lasted until we graduated from high school, and now whenever one of us sees him in public, we always make sure to ask if his brother is doing good, and if he's been to Utah lately. Hope he turned out all right. Story 12. Would claim stories he took from the most popular morning drive radio show in the area that we all listen to every day as being his and telling us. For instance, if there was a bit on the radio that some guy talked his way out of a ticket with a crazy story, that day we'd be regaled with the time he talked his way out of a ticket with the exact same story. I would tell him, yeah, we listened to the radio on the way to work too. Then he'd try to defend it as this really did happen to him. Shoot him down some more, and a week later it'd happen again. Dude would lie about the time of day. Chronic mental case. Story 13. Guy was called Sean, and I went to high school with him. He didn't seem to have any awareness of how ludicrous and totally unbelievable his stories were. And when he told stories, he conflated the tepid reactions of embarrassment and disbelief for expressions of disinterest, so he'd make the stories more unbelievable. The stupidest one he ever told was basically this. So, I was at the beach on the weekend surfing, and as I was catching a wave into shore, this great white shark came right up beside my board. So I hopped off my board onto the shark's back, and then rode him into the shallows. Really? I mean, who in the world would ever believe something like that? Story 14. 2 stories stand out. He was a Gulf War veteran. Except, dude, you were born in 1981, and the Gulf War was 1991 to 1992, when we were in 5th grade. Congrats on being an 11-year-old combat veteran. His uncle had taught him to fly an Air Force jet. By his telling, his uncle was a mechanic in the Air Force. They had one jet that apparently nobody could fix, but this uncle, through sheer mechanical savantism, fixed the jet. The Air Force, ignoring all fiscal law, apparently was so grateful to this mechanic that they gifted him the jet. He then flew the jet to our tiny local airport, where he taught my acquaintance how to fly it. Story 15. He's a senior employee where I work, in EMS. I heard him give a verbatim account of his mother-in-law reading The Exorcist and getting so freaked out that she threw the book in the river. He claimed to have seen that happen, bought a new copy, soaked it in water, and then replaced the wet copy in her nightstand, which led to her losing her mind. The problem is that I read that same internet thread like a week before. I never confronted him, but it makes me put all his epic tales of how he saved a life in perspective. Story 16. Taekwondo a couple years back. This guy had no friends, had the wildest stories, told me how he was lost in a field with nothing but a machete, decided to throw it, and it killed a cow. Or how he said that he was in Taekwondo because his family was being hunted by spies in Russia, and that's why he moved to Canada. He's a second dan black belt, while I'm a first dan. Still don't get how he thought we'd believe his stories, including he was about 13 at the time. Well, everybody knows that if you want to be good at Taekwondo, or Deathkwondo to be exact, all you have to do is grow a mullet and walk around shirtless with very short cut-off jean shorts. Then your body will just naturally be imbued with the inner wisdom of the martial art. Story 17. This was back when we were still in our teenage years, but still. A friend of mine had an elaborate lie that he was a professional motocross driver during when we were 12 years old. All his friends knew he was pulling it out of his butt. He never went to train or competitions. He didn't even own a freaking motorcycle, but still told us about it several times a week, unprompted. This went on for more than a year. We still give him crap about it. Story 18. Not a friend really, but this one coworker of mine once told me a few years back he was contracted to paint this sorority house, and while he was painting, about 8 girls, fresh out of the showers, wearing only towels, came in and got naked while they were working and just basically tried to sleep with him. Mind you, this guy is a 55-year-old redneck with about 3 teeth in his mouth, so I'm calling BS on that. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.